Okay, good evening, everybody. This is AOD Institute of Education. So tonight, I'm Dwayne. I'm Dwayne every night, but tonight we're doing CHCDIV002, Promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Safety, Session 3. We're finishing this unit tonight. Next week, we've got another unit, another core unit, I think it is, on legislation and working legally and ethically, I think. Something like that. So we'll just get started with the acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Haiti Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. So we'll just look at the housekeeping as we do every week, expectations from you and expectations from us. Cameras on. If you're in session in the class tonight, then put your camera on. If you need your camera off for any reason, do tell me. If you've got other stuff to do, then please tell me that you're turning your camera off. But otherwise, please leave your camera on just so that we're all working together. And microphones muted, just so that there's no feedback or any noise coming through from our background. Class break times after with a few hours of learning, studying, and everything that we've got to do. Obviously, a break every hour is going to be very, very helpful. So 10 minutes at 7 o'clock, 10 minutes at 8 o'clock for East Coast Australian time, that is, because we're all the same now. We had the clock movement of the weekend. Class participation, we'd love to hear from you. Please use the Zoom reaction button to put your hand up just so that we can all see it when somebody wants to interact. Respectful relationships, be mindful and kind with your words and respect the opinion of others. We're all learners and in this together, definitely. No smoking or vaping or alcohol on camera. We wouldn't ask anything of our learners. We wouldn't expect an industry. So it's just like a TAFE class or a work meeting, a staff meeting. That doesn't happen there. We'd have to go outside on break time to do any of that. So we won't do it here. Obviously, trigger warnings with the class content and any information that we have to talk about. Obviously, it can be confronting or triggering at times. We don't want to make it worse in any way. So that's one reason not to be smoking or drinking or vaping on camera. Equally, looking after each other is going to be helpful. And finally, obviously looking after each other, but most of all, you're not in any fit state or condition to look after other people if you're not looking after yourself primarily. So make time for other activities that nourish your mind and soul so you feel refreshed and ready for class each week. Just to start, this is what we're talking about tonight. Session one looked at before the settlers, before the Europeans arrived. Session two looked at after that, and this session three looks at more how we work in and with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders and the effect on the way they work today or the way they live today. So in all these are the reasons of things that we're talking about. It's fairly technical, a lot of slides to skip through. I'll try not to make it laborious because I know you're getting the slides anyway, so there's no point in me wasting your time looking at them. But I do want to highlight the important stuff, obviously. So we're bringing it all together. That's what we're doing tonight. That's the reason that we're for this last session. How can we use this information to improve our practice? Information being past 2 weeks of learning. How can we improve the way we work? How can we use this information to improve what our agency does and improve the practices? So based on not just the 2 weeks of study, but the past few hundred or 60,000 years of existence, how can we put that into perspective to work in the community with this? So whatever community service we're working in, because obviously we'd be studying this same module, whether we're studying alcohol and drugs and mental health and DIS, disability, aged care, youth work, all the same module. So services designed with mainstream Australia in mind are unlikely to cater for the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's quite key. Services designed with mainstream Australia in mind are unlikely to cater for the needs of any minority that isn't part of the mainstream society. So any minority that it could be a slightly less minority than mainstream Australia, but if it's still a minority, it's not going to be catered for, really. So whether it's any of the major cultures in Australia that aren't mainstream, we're going to be looking at how we would have to make an effort into their services and into their culture just to show that we are trying to provide a service for them. So if we're not in an area where Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander are living, then we could be working with any other culture of migrants or any other strong culture in Australia that isn't part of mainstream. So we have to figure out how we work with them. While the ideal situation is one in which community services for Indigenous people are provided by properly trained and qualified Indigenous people, this will not always be possible. So also key for an Indigenous person to be receptive to a community service that's been provided for them, quite often, if they've lived through trauma or they've lived through any domestic family violence, if they've lived through any difficulties, mental health issues, which any of us could, we're going to be more inclined to access a service that is provided for by somebody with the same culture as we are. So when we're looking for anybody that provides a service to us, somebody that is very similar to us, with culture, religion, age, somebody very similar to us is going to be more open to us accepting them. So the ideal situation is one in which community services for Indigenous people are provided by properly trained and qualified Indigenous people. This isn't always possible. So sometimes we are the community service people that are providing service to them, which leads us to the module title about being cultural safety, about providing cultural safety. Because they're a different cultural history, a different culture to us, then there could be a level of distrust there already. So we have to be providing a service from our culture to their culture, showing that despite the difference in culture, their culture is safe with us. So we're working in effective partnerships, supporting the development of effective partnerships between staff, whether that's Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people and their communities, or whatever culture we are. When we develop meaningful mutual respect and trust, we're ensuring that there will be increased participation of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. And it's the small things that quite often mean a lot. If we're providing a service to a specific culture, then making sure that we know what they would find offensive and not doing that is going to be massively helpful to them. Where the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, their culture is very creative. An ideal way would be to provide a service that shows creativity. So these slides that we're looking at, it's just words, words after words after words after words. There's no creativity in there at all. There's no pictures. It's yellow. There's no music. There's no wildlife. There's no culture in it at all. And it's just because we're skipping through slides. But this is going to be completely meaningless to people that aren't English as a first language or anybody that's not in this culture. So I guess we're taking for granted that this module is not for Indigenous Australians because of the maybe boring, maybe same-ishness of the slides. So when we're working with effective partnerships, due to the unique cultural heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, services must make sure that they are including their perspectives. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families will be looking for a sense of connection with their community and cultural heritage, so services must make this apparent in the physical environment, as well as the social connections of the service. Even to staff members treating them with respect and knowing about how body language works with them, even not abbreviating anything, knowing which words are offensive for them. If we're providing a service for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, then it might be more helpful to say that it is either Aboriginal or it's Torres Strait Islander. Which service is it that we're looking after? The extreme unhelpful way to work would be just lump it all together and just say ATSI, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander. ATSI communities support, which is offensive because of the abbreviation of just lumping everybody together, all of them cultures, we're providing a service for them, and then wondering why nobody turns up. So obviously, and this, when we're looking at acknowledgement of country, there was one or two questions in the assessments that were asking about one key way to asking about one key way to acknowledge cultural safety, apart from what I've just said, looking at how to respond to their culture. There's displaying, acting out, performing, reciting the acknowledgement of country. One strategy that is important to include in a cultural safety policy is to acknowledge the custodians of the land. It's not, so the tradition of that, it's not done all the time in Indigenous culture. It would be done if one clan or tribe is going to another clan or tribe, then they would welcome the one clan, and the ones that are going there would acknowledge the culture and their custodians of where they're going. So when we're doing that every week or in any ceremony or any meeting that we go to, we're acknowledging the people that have come into our meeting. They might have made a long trip, they might be from around the corner, but we're acknowledging them coming to our meeting. So services will need to create an acknowledgement of country, just to pay respect to anybody that is making that effort to attend that service. There's certain guidelines about how to do that. Obviously, we've got our own at HADA that can be copied. When you're doing an acknowledgement of country, obviously you would talk to elders or significant people in that culture. Just like if it wasn't Indigenous Australians that we were working with, then we would be talking to key people in any culture that we're wanting to work with and say, how can we put on a service for your culture and make sure that you and all of families, the community, how can we make sure that you know that you can come to our service and get support and that we're not going to expect you to be English or white or doing anything that's going to be uncomfortable for you.
Made it.
Um, should be displayed in the entrance of the service and should be included in service websites, newsletters, and anything that could go out in the community. I'm trying to skip through as many of these slides as I can because I want to get through to everything else that we have to do tonight. So this is where we've pretty much got to get to cultural safety strategies and policies, how to build policies and procedures that that are consistent with working in this environment. It's important to develop strategies and effective, consistent practices to ensure a culturally safe work environment. Cultural safe policy or a cultural safety policy, culturally safe. I'm not quite sure the right word of that. Anyway, should be developed and should also be evaluated and reviewed regularly. So maybe annually, maybe maybe even every few months, every 6 months. Obviously, if it's getting reviewed, if a work health and safety policy is getting reviewed, whenever it gets reviewed, it's going to get reviewed by talking to any fire representatives or any work health and safety department representatives or fair work representatives. You would do that, obviously. So a cultural safety policy should be developed and reviewed and evaluated by members of the community that we're working with. So culturally safe services should place an emphasis on visual art, dance, music, song, ceremony, and ritual because these things are so integral to the characteristics of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The service needs to be aware of the current health issues that affect the population in the area and in other areas, including how the history of Australia impacted and still impacts on Indigenous health. So, though we might have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services in Northern Territory, New South Wales, and South Australia, their service response and their service outlook might be completely different in all three places. Because, the culture is going to be slightly different, but the health is going to be very different. The mental health is going to be very, very different. The drug and alcohol usage could well be very, very different. And then moving into Northern Territory near Uluru, the communities there that are, I've heard, are doing really, really well, that are dry, sober communities that are they've got a lot of funding and there's some real massive effort being done with them and the services that are working there that all of the areas are going to be putting on different services with different perspectives. So, with strategies, are we welcoming Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families? What are the first impressions when entering our service? Are we open at times where Aboriginal families can access our service? Knowing that if if we are in the middle of a city, is that quite far from where a lot of the Indigenous community are living? If it is quite far, are the bus routes good to be useful? Is it easy to find? If somebody has a car, um, are they going to be able to find our service easily? Is it mapped out well? Is the building significant when you're walking through some city centres or town centres and you see the Indigenous art down the side of the building? Obviously, there could be something to point the building out to just to help them. Do our resources meet the specific needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families? If our resources don't meet their needs, then what is the point? Like, then our resources are a waste of money. We can go to the government, we can get $10,000 to get some resources to meet people's needs in the community. But if it's not meeting the people's need who we're trying to access, then we're wasting our money. It does happen, obviously. People get money from the government, get resources. It's completely way off, and they wonder why people aren't accessing the service because they were maybe providing resources for needs that weren't there. And the whole community says, but we don't need that. We need this instead. So resources to promote partnerships, cultural awareness and language services for our staff, our services, our industry, to make sure that we know how to get in there. And government health websites providing data on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and education. Also, the Department of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders policy website. So just Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation. Just want to leave it there. We'll maybe get to something else, but obviously videos and stuff are, you can watch them in your own time easily. Wanted to look at the assessment of, I think it's the third one. I'll just bring it up. I closed it. It's the one where you have to interview the member of the community. Yes, here it is. So I don't know whether you'll get time to complete some of this tonight. You should do. But I did want to throw some stuff at you just to help you. So I know we looked at it last week, but you're required to complete a report on culture of the First Nation of the First People of Australia, their cultural safety needs and strategies to ensure cultural safety in your service. For this, you'll need to complete the following: search, identify, and talk with a person who has a great deal of knowledge about the First Nation, about the First Peoples of Australia. Sorry. For example, a local First Nations resident, perhaps someone you've worked with in community services setting, person from a local First Nations organisation, maybe, for example, in an Aboriginal cultural centre. There's a lot of them around. an Aboriginal cooperative, maybe a community worker, a colleague, supervisor, or client. A lot of the you're trying to assess a year. I'll just point it to somewhere else. Um, a lot of the community services in your local area might be helpful if you start digging into them. So whether it's like salvos, any of the op shops, men's shed, um, any of those community services quite often will have somebody that is going to potentially be a member of their community helping out in there. Maybe even if they don't, then they're going to possibly point you to somebody who will. So having a look around certain op shops, community services, things like that can help. The person should ideally be of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent. Yes, do talk to us if you can't find somebody, obviously, and we'll help you out. However, there is some resources that I'm giving you now that can help. Research and learn about the culture of the First Nation people of Australia, their major issues and strategies to ensure cultural safety in your service. Write your research report in the template provided below. So there it is. Can everybody access it? I'm hoping, because I've been fantastic. If Coco puts a thumbs up, then perfect. Yeah. Madison as well, that's good.
I've just got a question. Yeah, when it says down the bottom a bit there that we are to research these questions, is that when we're speaking to the person of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander descent? Is that the research there? Okay, so they should
Yeah.
know the answers to this.
Sorry, yeah, just a sec. That's better. Yes, yes, it is. So them questions are to help guide you. So here, that's like an overview. Search, search, identify, and talk with the person with a great deal of knowledge about the First Nation people. So that might be what you might tell somebody, that that's what you have to do. That's the project that you've got to do. Have they got a bit of time to just answer some questions? And then when they say, yeah, I'd love to, then you pull out your documents or just bits of paper. And
Okay.
obviously, they don't, you're not expecting them to answer every single thing. A lot of people will be responsive to saying, yeah, if they've got the time, then a lot of people like talking about themselves. So, background, three objectives of the research. What is it that you're trying to do? You can get these, like the three objectives, you can get them from anything here. So you're looking at community services, maybe. You're looking at, depending on who you speak to, you can almost tailor the objectives with them and maybe talk about the local history thing of the town, village, city, or suburb that you're in or that they're in. It could be a social history, it could be a historical thing, it could be an environmental thing. So when you're working, don't pick objectives and then expect somebody else to say, oh, yeah, okay, well, let's talk about that. Find out what they'd like to talk about and then maybe pick some objectives with them. And you'll find you have heaps to talk about. So it's a lot of it's low level. Who did you consult and why did you choose that person? Don't say because you couldn't find anybody else. Like pick something about them. But when you speak to them and they're responsive and you find out a little bit about their life, then that's often a reason why you can speak to them. Yes, Arnie.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Good point, Arne.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in India and I don't know when I'm gonna be in Australia. It doesn't look like it's gonna be anytime soon.
That's all right. Well, I've got some stuff for everybody, and we'll have a look at what we can do with it and where we can go with it. So, um,
Okay.
get back to me in about 15 minutes. Um, what's the additional? A lot of this you can fill in just in history. So, what's the traditional land of the local area of the person? Like if you're looking around your local area, then you're going to be able to find that out already. What's the history of the First Nation people of the local area? You might be able to Google that. A lot of this, yes, you can Google, but it's going to be more interesting if the um, person is telling you all this local history. Are there any differences between different First Nations communities in your local area? If you wish to acknowledge the First Nations country at the beginning of a meeting, what are the words that you should use? So that's when it says that, it's meaning what are the specific things that need to be ticked off in an acknowledgement of country? And Haida has ticked them off in the way we use it. Um, so for anybody that's formulating an acknowledgement of country for a workplace or for a service, um, for a meeting that has not been put on before, and they're wanting to acknowledge the um, First Nation cultures, then they have to go through a tick box of making sure that all of these things are there. So, what is that? And then you put that in there. What are the major issues the First Nations children and families face in this region? Are there suitable and available facilities in the area for local First Nations people to access? What could be done to improve this? If there's no facilities in your area, then that might mean that there aren't many First Nation people in the area, not many. If um, if the service is there, then there's probably going to be people around in the area. So that could be one way to find somebody. Go around wherever locally you can find some um, Indigenous service. There's probably going to be a community close by. It would be highly unlikely, though I'm sure it does happen somewhere, where there's a community and there's no service for them. That would be pretty tragic. What are the three main things that a community facility service needs to include for cultural safety for First Nations people? Um, how could an outside school hours care service partner with the local First Nations community to support cultural awareness? During your talk, how did you make sure you were culturally appropriate? List in any way. If your interview is with a person of non-Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent, you should comment on whether you could have varied your style had they been a First Nation person. So all the way through the assessment, it's expecting you to talk to a First Nation person, but then it's saying if you didn't, if you spoke to somebody else, if all you did was Google on the internet, how would it have changed if you'd actually been able to speak to somebody? Um, and as long as there's plenty of information, like plenty of detail. So, first of all, the video that we saw last week about Mitch Tambo, there is um, there's a link to that for a start, and some paperwork. So I'll just upload them in the chat first. Um, Actually, I'll look through them just so you know what we're doing. So again, this is a quick description of the task. And this is alluding to selecting a public figure that you might not actually have any contact with them. So we could be talking about Mitch Tambo or somebody that is in media significance, even if you were able to find a media personality or a political personality. What would you say to them then if you were able to contact them and talk to them and ask them all of the questions that you have to ask? And these are the objectives here. You can use these objectives ideally if you want. Key samples to answer a lot of the questions. So it's generally just a guide. I'll put this in first. Um, I'll just give you the two one at a time. All right, there's the first one. The other one, a lot about Mitch Tambo. It's almost like a profile of what he's done. Certain links on the internet about his personal beliefs about things. The link that we watched is on here somewhere. It was on SBS. Was it on SBS? No, it was on ABC. So Rich Tambo is an inspiring artist and advocate, has made significant contributions to promote an understanding and respect for First Nations people. Let's explore this work and consider effective ways to engage with First Nations communities. So Rich Tambo, known for his didgeridoo playing, traditional dancing and singing, and rapping, has a deep connection to his Gamilaroi Biriguba heritage. Hope I'm not being offensive when I pronounce things like this. He's gone from auditioning on Australia's Got Talent to performing in front of thousands at Firefight Australia and has become a UNICEF ambassador for children's rights and issues. As organisations seek to engage effectively with First Nation peoples, adopting principled approaches is crucial. So there's a lot about Mitch in here. If you had enough from Mitch and you did enough research, you would possibly be able to answer the questions just about Mitch. But it's entirely up to you. Some people would prefer to walk down the street, talk to a local community member, and then it's all finished and done. But I'll put that's an important. Sorry, them two are very important questions. So I'll put this in. All right, if any of them are useful, great. If they're not, don't worry about it. You might have your own ideas for how you're going to do the assessment, which is fine. Okay, so even go on, Glenn. What were you going to say, Glenn? Glenn, are you talking with the mic?
Yeah,
Yes,
there
there
you
you go.
In the task, it says to go into the first access information.
For the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander project?
No, for that role play for Esther. But the thing is,
Oh, yeah.
so I went into the stuff to look at the policies and procedures,
Oh, yeah, good.
but I don't know which one to pick up because there's exit policy, needs policy, protection policy for whistleblowers. Hang on a
We
sec.
probably need to have a look at that next week then. I can't remember whether it's a 2-week module or a 3-week module.
Can you see my screen?
I can't. We'll look at it next week. I've just got to do a few slides for the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander thing at the moment. But we'll dig into that next week.
Oh, okay. So which one do I need though?
We'll look at that next week. It's next week's module. So we've finished that now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Technically, we don't start it till next week. I just wanted to have a quick look down the role play for it, just as a starter role play task for everybody. But
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's just that I did because it said we had to know the policies for it, for that
Yeah.
role play. So we need to be able to quickly read up on the policies so that John Ford is up to date with his correct information.
yeah, definitely.
Otherwise,
But
you know what I mean? Like,
we'll work through that, definitely.
okay. All right.
So when if you were interviewing any community member, like if they were a senior community member, then I think probably the biggest thing, the biggest recommendation would be told is to give them time and not rush anyone. Like if you're going to interview, like some school kids, they'll go into an old folks home and like interview really senior old people about what life was like 70 years ago and things like that. And with a lot of older people rushing them and saying, all right, yeah, I know, but can you just answer the question? Rather than letting the person talk through what they wanted to do, is going to be a lot easier for them. It's exactly the same with somebody from a different culture, especially when we're expecting that other person to be maybe a senior, elder, important member of the community that has lived a long enough time that we want to interview them about it. So, with time being the key topic here, in Western culture, we place emphasis on meeting deadlines and schedules. Time is perceived differently in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. Value is placed on family responsibilities and community relationships. So we place, as it says, we place value on the time, but the other community is going to be placing value on the relationship and the conversation. So we may have an hour, or we may have 45 minutes, or we may only have half an hour to get this task done. But when in another culture, they flip it right round and they say, no, this conversation is going to take however long it's going to take, and we've got to get through all these points. If it takes 10 minutes, it's done. If it takes an hour and a half, then it's going to take an hour and a half. So that's why we need to throw out almost the concept of expecting people to abide by our time method. So take the time to explain and don't rush the person. Now, with communication, I'm doing these slides backwards. It seems like they've done the most important ones right at the end. So communication, listen, avoid complex words, explain why you need to ask any of these questions, check for understanding. If needed, use diagrams and images, maybe photos or pictures. If they get confused about what we're asking or why we're asking, that could make them close down and not want to speak. But if they actually understand that all we want to know is their opinion and their story and their perspectives, they're going to be a lot more open to talk to us. So, and we've got to figure that out, whether eye contact may not be appropriate. Probably won't be appropriate. Shame, deeply felt feelings of being ashamed or embarrassed for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people may result from sharing private or personal information, cultural beliefs, and from breaches of confidentiality. There's one of the videos that are for this topic. I think I mentioned it last week. There's like rabbit-proof fence, lousy little sixpence. In Lousy Little Sixpence, one of the really old aunties says that when she was working with one service, part of the not wanting to look somebody in the eyes was that they feel ashamed of who they are. So if you're looking at me, you're looking at why I feel ashamed of who I am. If we can talk and you not look at me, it feels a lot easier for me to not think about the shame that I'm going through about what social class I'm in, or the fact that I was raped, or the fact that I have to beg for food, or the fact that I've been abused, or I get beaten up. Any of these things, if you can look away from me, then it feels easier for me not to think about that shame. So build relationships within the local community and learn suitable and generally accepted words. Remember that you need to understand local protocols, certain ways that different people work. That's time. So almost finished on what I wanted to get done. So language and literacy, this can create obvious communication difficulties when it's essential use an interpreter. Generally, we look in a lot of modules, we talk about getting an interpreter in when a lot of communities can't understand what we're talking about, or we're trying to talk about mental health issues or drug and alcohol issues. And if the person doesn't understand, then we're going to need an interpreter. Usually, we would never get a family member in because they can be too biased, or they can be too shocked, or they can not communicate what we're wanting them to communicate, or they can not communicate what the client is wanting to communicate. With the Indigenous community, it's a little bit more difficult. They do have their own representative interpreters, but quite often it's going to be some close family member or somebody that knows the client. So it can be difficult, but an interpreter at least is going to be important. Self-determination. So self-determination involves a transfer of decision-making power from the government to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Self-determination is what we're trying to do with anyone. So when people have been struggling with mental health issues, or have been struggling with alcohol and drugs or medication, people feel like their own control has been taken away from them in their life because of certain things. And what we want to do is give back people certain control and a certain power in their own life. And that is what we're meaning by self-determination. When, for the Indigenous community, when their rights and their land and their culture were tried to be stolen from them, then what the government has started to do, obviously with certain legislation, and what we're trying to do is try and give certain power dynamics back to them, so that when somebody that's felt out of control starts to feel in control, things start to help them. It means creating programs and resources that can assist them in rebuilding their own decision-making capabilities. Ongoing process of choice to ensure that Indigenous communities are able to meet their social, cultural, and economic needs. It's not about creating a separate Indigenous state. It's not about creating a separate Indigenous community industry. It's not about segregating different people. It's about integrating and supporting them when they can. The right to self-determination is based on simple acknowledgement that Indigenous peoples are Australia's first people. The right to self-determination is based on the simple acknowledgement that Indigenous peoples are Australia. Self-determination includes everything from policy formulation to providing services from cultural peers or elders rather than outside of Aboriginal culture. So with the Indigenous culture, like talking about marriage, talking about jobs, talking about family relations, talking about alcohol, drug issues, community issues, all of these are discussed by elders anyway in their culture. If we don't listen to them and their opinions, their point of view about their culture, then we haven't changed in 200 years. We're just telling them what the white man thinks is good for them, which has been pretty big in the media in the past couple of years. So in the early 70s, the Aboriginal people requested the right to administer their own communities. Federal government agreed with certain conditions, and a central Aboriginal administrator called Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC, was created. Don't know how well that has gone down in the individual communities, because that's ATSI is not one community. It's all of the Torres Strait Islander communities, and it's all of the Aboriginal communities all thrown to one, which might not go down very well. It's had many names over the years and is now known as the Prime Minister and Cabinet. National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, supports Indigenous autonomy, creating healthy futures for the next generations, and the mainstream services are not always appropriate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So let's leave it there.